Greetings. So recently HT Logistics asked a really good question on his live stream. It was, why is it some years are boom and some years are bust for no real reason? Well, the explanation for that is actually incredibly simple. It even goes back to explain why the 90s were the way they were. Anyhow, this is OTR Ogre and Corgi. Like, link, and subscribe. Let's get into it. Trucking greatly is determined price-wise on what people are willing to pay, and what they're willing to pay is based on supply and demand. We'll use the example of Florida. During the dead of winter, everybody would rather be in Florida than driving in Minnesota. So driving that I-94 road, a lot of people are trying to avoid that, as where most people would rather drive the I-10. So all that I-10 freight has a lot of people around, therefore what you have to pay them is less. So most people understand this part. That's why Florida is notoriously bad. So you can make a lot of money going into Florida from the north, but getting out of there, that can be a problem. Take that same line of thinking and then apply it to the driver pool in general. Like, what's the pool? The amount of people altogether in it. So let's say the economy's booming. It's doing great. If we're being honest about trucking, especially OTR, there's not a lot of cats like me out here where I'm a nomad. It's just me and a dog and a life. I love traveling. I love seeing things. Most people are out here because there was nothing going on in their hometown. You know, the factory shut down or the business is bad. You know, there hasn't been a coal mine in ages, so they went to trucking so they could save their home and feed their family or pay their child support. Now imagine in a booming economy, there's a job back home for them to do. Maybe even something they previously did. Well, a lot of these guys that don't really want to be out here to begin with just say, I'm not going to drive, and they just take off. They're like, I'm heading home. So that means that's one less driver, therefore one less truck out on the road. So, you know, booming economy, there's more freight but less people to move it, which then causes, you know, the prices to spike even more because people start quickly realizing, hey, in this general area there ain't that many drivers around, so I'm going to ask a little bit more and see what I can get, and then people negotiate and they get higher rates. That's kind of what we're seeing now. And why are we seeing that now in this, like, you know, 2021 era? Because there's still people who got a lot of money on those stimmy checks, plus they didn't have to pay rent. So they're still not willing to go back to work and work a normal job. So there's actually truckers that are like, hey, I'll take that normal job if I can get out of this truck. And by getting out of this truck, that's one less truck on the road. So that's the same, you know, way it applies. Now, let's say it goes the other direction. Why is it when there's tons of truckers, they don't want to pay anything for freight? Well, because there's a lot of drivers in the pool, therefore trucks on the road. So the economy goes tits up. Then a lot of people get into the trucking industry temporarily so they can feed their family, pay their bills, and all that crap. But because there's so many people, then, you know, the big companies plus all the other companies and the freight brokers are like, wait a minute. They got to fight for any scrap of meat. So let's see how low it can go. Let's make them limbo through this. And basically, for a while, until the economy picks up, yeah, that's what people got to deal with. And the wise guys out there, you know, the intelligent men, they basically go out and say, well, if the freight rate isn't going to pay, I'm just going to park my truck, which makes sense. You know, there's that, you know, 5 to 6 months during the winter that you wouldn't want to drive anyways. That actually increases the value of whoever's still driving in the north. And then they drive seasonally. But then when the big market picks up, then the guy who already owns his truck, he's already good, ready to go. He's literally ready to capitalize on this in godlike freight rates. But for the most part, it really does come back to if there's too many people on the road. Now, let's say, back to the 90s. Why did the 90s work the way they did? Well, simply put, the 90s had a new entire industry come into it. We had, you know, everybody was starting getting the personal computer, the internet at home. So there was, you know, the .com, all these different programs like that, all sorts of new business, new money flowing all over the place. So there was also the aspect that back in, like, you know, the 70s, the 80s, people looked at the factory jobs as dirty and the trade jobs like plumbing or electricians or truckers as a dirty job, and they didn't want their kids doing it. So they weren't incentivizing that. The fathers that were truckers weren't telling their kids, hey man, let's get behind the wheel and drive truck. They were putting their kids through college. So you had a lack of drivers back then. And then basically, once again, once the tech bubble bursts, then you see some people getting in. But what also started happening more and more over the years is they normalized having immigrants come over. So, you know, even if, let me put it this way. Even if your local people won't work for that rate, once you have a ton of people that can do the same thing you can do from other countries and they can live off almost nothing like I do, You know, or, I mean, I could live comfortably in America off $5,000 a year. What ends up happening is these people can work for a few years in America, live, you know, super monk-like, and then, you know, go back to their home country and retire young. Well, what does that do to the freight market? Well, that means there's always a cheap pool of drivers that are willing to take that cheaper freight, but still do absolutely fine because they have that low-cost operation. So, it's like this. You can either mechanize, automate, or you can bring in Mexicans, as the joke goes. So whether it's Mexicans, Punjabis, or whatnot, machines are Mexicans. Which do you have? And once you bring in another source of freight transportation or workers or whatnot, then the rates go down. So the more people that are out here, the less you make. The less people that are willing to do this, the more they have to pay. It's really that simple. That's why some years are really hot, some years are really cold. And right now, you got a ton of people that are living more comfortably at home, and so those guys that are still willing to work a job can get out of the industry, get out of the truck, go home and make better money. So now, that makes these freight loads pay far more. Anyhow, that's just my theory on it. This is OTR Ogre and Corgi. Y'all have a good one. Oh yeah, like, link, and subscribe.